Hi everyone. One of you emailed me asking me a question about creating volumetric clouds without using particles in After Effects. The answer is yes, this is something that you can do. It is not as controlled as you would if you were using a particular effect, for example, from Trapcode or Form or something like that, where you have more control over the particles, but you can fake it pretty well by using the standard filters that After Effects ships with. So for that, I thought I'd put together this short video to show you how to create this. So for this, we're going to be using, the first thing we're going to do is we want to create a composition, and this composition is going to be about 2,000 pixels by 1,000 pixels in height, and we're going to call this cloud texture. So we're going to start with that. And in this cloud texture composition, I'm going to create a solid, make it the same size as the comp, and then I'm going to apply a fractal noise as we have done in class. We have you work with fractal noise several times. That creates this little wispy looking cloud or webby looking thing. I want to smooth out those dark areas, so I want to change my fractal noise type from soft linear to spline. And I want to change the size of this by turning off its uniform scaling and increasing its width to about 600. So I want to get these little wisps going across the screen. Now, I also want to change this over time. So for that, I'm going to use a time expression under the evolution, press Alt on the keyboard, click on the stopwatch, and type time times, in this case, let's say 150. And that's going to make my fractal noise change over time. Now, one of the things that is going to sell this effect is if I can wrap this around an object, make it, let's say, a sphere, and make sure that it's seamless. The problem with this is that fractal noise is not a tileable effect. So what I want to do is I want to create a workaround for this. I'm going to create an adjustment layer, and then on top of that adjustment layer, I am going to place an offset filter. Now, as you know, offset basically sends things, moves them from their original coordinates. So I want to make sure that I place the center of this on the 2000 point on the x-axis. And then I want to create a mask around the center area of that layer. So I want to go ahead and create on the actual adjustment layer, I want to create that mask. And instead of adding for its mode, I want to change it to subtract. Now, with that done, I want to press the F key on the keyboard to call the feathering value for the mask, and I want to change that to say like 150 or 200, something like this. And so now I have feathered the texture on either side of over here, and as you know, because we created the offset, this edge will match this edge, and so when I wrap this around anything, it's going to be seamless. So with that done, I want to go ahead and create a new composition, and this composition is going to be called the cloud sphere. And I want to make that about 1200 by 1200. And into that cloud sphere composition, I want to bring in the cloud texture. Now, as the name implies, I am going to be applying the CC sphere filter. And remember, this one we saw in class is the one that creates orbs of whatever you apply them to. And I want to increase the size of this slightly, so let's make it about 400. And as you can see, when I scrub this, basically my texture will be changing over time on that planet. But I also want to have the ability to rotate this sphere. So I want to use the rotation value of CC sphere. I want to press the Alt key on the keyboard, click on the stopwatch for rotation on the y-axis, and I want to apply a time times -150 expression to that. And what that's going to do is going to basically move my planet, rotate my planet to the left as the texture changes. So that sells that effect a little bit. Now, this looks like clouds, but it's basically an orb of clouds. It's really, in order to see, I need to have areas of transparency on what I'm looking. And so to do that, I want to apply an extract filter. Now, remember, we saw extract when we were looking at the keying effects, when we were looking at green screening and all that stuff. That's when we saw extract for the first time. So let me go to the filters, filter out for extract, and apply an extract filter to this. Now, this extract filter I want to apply before I apply the sphere. And the reason for that is because, so let me bring it up to the stack. The reason for that is because I want to apply it to the actual texture, not to the sphere itself. So applying it before the sphere, remember, filters rendered in this direction. So what's going to happen is it will render first the extract, which allows me to remove some of the white or dark areas depending on how I slide this gradient. And so if I go and I bring my white point down to about, let's say 125, 120, around this area, I'm seeing the spacing being created by reducing the amount of white that is visible on that particular texture. So if I turn that off, you'll see that I am basically dropping some of the white areas of that filter, some of the light areas. So if I do that, now I get this little orb of what looks like clouds that are changing over time because of the evolution on the fractal noise on the original texture. So with that done, what I want to do is, the first thing that I notice is that basically this becomes flat. This looks like an eggshell. It has no volume. So I need to start faking that volume. But now I have clouds, or I have a cloudy texture. So how do I go about faking that cloudy texture? Well, the first thing I want to do is I want to make use of two values from this. I want to retain the ability to change the value for my the way this is rendering, which is basically based on the CC sphere. I can either render the outside, the inside, or both. So I want to retain that ability to switch around when I need to. I also want to change the white point of I want to make use of the white point on my extract filter. So to do so, what I want to do is I want to bring out my essential graphics panel, and I want to select from that essential graphics panel composition, I want to choose the cloud sphere. Now in here, I want to go ahead and dump in from the filters. I want to dump in, like I said, my render, and I want to go up to the extract, and I want to dump in my white point. So with those two values ready to go under my essential graphics, I can now go ahead and create a new composition. And this composition is going to be my sphere assembly, or my cloud assembly, sorry. Okay, and I want to make this about 1600 or 1500, something like that, something a little bit bigger. And I want to click OK. Now I can go ahead and close my essential graphic. I want to keep it open so you guys remember how this works from when we saw this back when we were working with shapes. So let me go ahead and bring in the cloud sphere into this composition. And notice that when I open up my properties for that layer, I not only have the transformation values, but I also have the essential properties, which contain whatever I had dumped into my essential graphics panel. So if I expand that, I see render and white point for that layer, which is what I placed in here. Now remember, you can always go back if you need any other properties, go back to the original composition where you extracted these things, and you can go ahead and grab another value, say for example invert, and when you go back to your new composition, you will have that value under the essential properties. So you can go ahead and keep on adding or removing as necessary. You can always go back and remove one of these things if need be. I don't need invert, so I'm just going to leave it there for now, but it's not going to do anything for me. So now actually it's going to get confusing. Let me go ahead and go back to my thing here, delete it, and now it's gone from there. So now what I want to do at this point is I want to make use of this information. I only want to use the front portion of this particular layer in this composition. So instead of rendering the full, I want to change to the outside only. So I see only the outside of the sphere. Okay, now let me go ahead and close this panel here. And to that cloud sphere, I want to start faking that volume. And so to do so, I want to use a couple of filters. The first one is going to be something called CC Radial Fast Blur. And that basically creates kind of like a glow sticking out of my pixels on my screen. Whatever is visible is going to create kind of like a pixel grade shine, let's call it that, out of that whatever object has those pixels. And then I want to bring, but it's kind of feathery as you can see on the edges. So I want to bring that down with a matte choker. So matte choker is another one of those filters that we saw when we were working on keying. So I'm going to use matte choker here. And for matte choker, what I want to do is I want to go ahead and bring down my geometric softness. It's the first thing I want to do. So I'm going to make it 0. I want to bring my matte choker to negative value completely. So at 127. And then I want to turn my softness to 0. So let me zoom out again on this composition. And you guys see that basically what this has done is basically it has created this extrusion, this fake extrusion coming out of whatever pixels I had on the screen. And they almost look like extrusions of the geometry coming out towards the camera. And as the clouds appear or disappear, basically I created almost like a fill. Think of this like the fill in an Oreo cookie. That's basically what this is. We just created that extrusion. And so what we want to do now is, well, the first thing I notice is that the matte choker and actually the radial fast blur basically remove most of the details from the cloud texture. So I want to bring that back. So to do that, I want to go back to my project window and I want to bring another copy of the cloud sphere onto this. Now you see that I have these two should match, these two layers, but the top one contains very sharp values for what we have originally. So for this, what I want to do at this point is I want to open that up and I want to make use of all the information that was inside that particular sphere, which was controlled with a white point on the original composition under cloud sphere. Remember, we created the little holes in the clouds by changing the white point on the extract layer, on the extract filter. So what I want to do is go back here, and I want to increase the white point completely to 100% so that I completely see the sphere without any holes. And what I want to use this for is I want to make this the fill and that background layer the alpha. Now we've done this with alpha matting in class, but this time I want to show you a different way to do this. I want to increase the size of that sphere so that it fills the space that the extrusion, the fake extrusion we created in the background has created. So I want to bring it up to about this size. And then I want to make use of this little switch right here. And that is called the preserve underlying transparency switch. And what that does for you is that it uses this information here as the content and this one as the alpha, which means it's basically the reverse of what an alpha matte was. Remember, alpha matting would be looking from the bottom up, where this would be the content and this would be the alpha. In this case, this down here would become my alpha, and this right here would become my texture right here. Okay, so that's basically what this little switch does. And when I do that, basically my extrusion, my fake extrusion, got filled out with the details of this layer up here. So now I get some of that little thickness being translated into this setup, but I still see very sharp edges. And the reason for that is because of the matte choker that we had applied before. So what we want to do is we want to compensate for that matte choker. So what we want to do is, let me collapse these two. I want to create a new adjustment layer. And into this adjustment layer, I want to apply something called roughen edges. Now, funny enough, roughen edges is a filter that will roughen edges. But in our case, we want to make use of it to do the reverse, which is to smooth out these edges around these very sharp edges. So to do so, I want to increase the border for this to a high number, like 80, for example. And you can see that now I get the little squiggles around my edges. As I go through time, I can see them basically changing, and I get a little squiggles. So that's nice. Now, the next thing I want to do is I want to bring down the sharpness. So from that almost to 0, so that I get a little bit more bellowing, a little bit more feathering on the edges. So I want to go to like 0.8 or something like that. 0.08, I'm sorry. And I want to also change the stretching of this significantly so that I can get not so, they almost look like they're all pointing up and down. So I want to change a little bit of the width. So I want to bring this up to about 1, let's say, or 0.9, let's say. That works. And I want to change the complexity. Now, if I zoom into this to 100%, you see that this has this little nice feathering. But as soon as I change the complexity of my roughen edges to about 5, let's say, now I'm getting what looks like particles of clouds sticking out of the actual big blobs of clouds. So when I render this back, I see the little billowy, feathery things sticking out of the clouds. But as you can see, they're not moving. The roughen edges particles are not moving, or what's being generated by them is not moving. So in order to make that change, we need to change the offset value of my turbulence. And as you can see, this is 2 values. So remember, to create 2 values, I need to press the Alt key, click on the stopwatch for the offset turbulence, and to declare the 2 values for an expression, I need to open up with the square brackets. And then for the x value, I am going to use a time expression, time times -1000. So this is going to be moving very fast to the left, comma, and then for the y, I'm going to use time times for -400 so that it's moving up. And then I'm going to close with square brackets, semicolon, and the expression is complete. Now, when I play this back, those little particles are moving to the left and up as my sphere is rotating to the left, as the front of my sphere is rotating to the left. So it almost looks like they are coming off the sphere as these big clouds rotate. It's basically throwing all these little smoky particles on the edges towards the outside as it goes, as you can see. So that starts creating that volumetric feel for this, okay? Now, we had called this this composition cloud assembly, but in reality, this would be the front portion of my cloud. So what I want to do is I want to rename that from cloud assembly to cloud front. So let me just go ahead and call this one cloud front. And I want to make a copy of that cloud front in my project window, and I want to rename the copy cloud back. And that's because I'm going to be opening up that new composition by double clicking it, because I'm going to use those layers in here, the texture layers, to do the back of the sphere. That's why we exported in the essential graphics, we exported the values for the render. So I want to change that to the inside on both of those layers. So I want to make sure that both of them are inside. And so this is basically creating the effect on the inside. Now remember, we had created an expression on the adjustment layer under the roughen edges to make things move to the left on the outside. So they should be moving to the right on the inside. So if I go and select the layer, press the U key a couple of times so that it opens up anything that has been changed on the filters, I see my expression here. And remember, this negative value on the x-axis is making that offset move to the left. So if I make it positive, now it's going to be moving to the right. At the same time, the particle should keep on going up. So the -400 works for the y-axis. So now you see that the little wisps are moving to the right instead of to the left. And this would be the back part of my sphere. So the way I assemble this is basically by grabbing those two compositions and maybe dragging them into a composition of their own. Make sure that they're not sequencing. Make sure that it's a single composition. Make sure that there's nothing else is changed here. Make sure just that this is off, basically, as the main thing. And that creates the composition with the back and the front. Bring the back to the back, keep the front in the front. Make sure that the back is a little scaled down. I would say probably like about 95%. So that is just as small so that we don't see that overlap of edges over here. So that's why I usually scale that down. And when I play this back, basically I get very volumetric clouds. They're basically surrounding something, okay? Now this can be made even better. If I, for example, because these are two separate layers, I can parent them one to another. So let me make sure that this one is parented to that, for example. So if I scale the front, the back also scales. And so I want to keep that parenting. That's the first thing. The second thing is I can put anything between these two because this is almost like one of those Russian dolls that are basically when you basically can put things in between and keep on putting things in between. In this case, let me go ahead and create a solid, make it white, and I want to make a mask in the center of this solid. Press the F key and make that feathering about 200. So it looks like a little orb, and I'll place that in between the two layers. So now it looks like there's this ball of energy inside the clouds. If I want to sell an effect like this, then I would probably change the tinting of my back cloud. So I'll add a tint filter to that and make the black point a little lighter. So something like probably like 80–90% opacity on the black channel right here for the black. So that basically becomes the light that is being reflected inside the clouds. Okay. And so now it's getting even more volumetric because there's a difference between the front and the back in the amount of energy that you're seeing. I also would probably want to make my front a little darker. So if I go ahead and select the front of the cloud and I apply a curves filter to it, maybe I want to bring that down slightly so that's a little darker. And maybe I also want to apply the tint effect. So I'm going to copy the tint effect from the back of the sphere to the front. You'll see that this basically does away with everything we've done so far, but that's okay. What we're going to do at this point is I want to bring that information back by doing what I want is I want to get the glow around this. I am thinking now volumetric. I'm thinking of volume. That's all I'm thinking. So I want to make sure that I create layers where you see differentiation between borders, between the pixels that are inside the orb and those that are outside. So for that, what I want to do is I want to apply a filter to this called transform. Actually, hold on. Let me think of the order in which I want to apply this. Yeah, I think I want to just go ahead and start with transform. So let's go ahead and do transform on this one. Transform allows me to apply some of the values that some of the transformations that I have under my regular transform, but through a filter. So I want to go ahead and make use of that. I want to change the scale on this to about 90, and you'll see that basically it reduced the size of my composition. But on top of my layer, sorry. But on top of that, I want to apply something else called CC Composite. Now, what CC Composite is going to do is going to bring back the information that is stored inside the cloud, but at the same time, it's going to retain that white glow that I had applied through the tint, and it allows me to then go ahead and turn off the, let's say, the RGB only option, and now it basically makes use of all the information to expand back out. Now, what did that do? Well, let me turn off those two filters. Let me actually turn off these three filters so we can see the difference. So that is with all the information, without the information. So as you can see, I'm gaining some information of particles that is inside or in between the different layers by applying those three filters. First the tint, then the transform to shrink, and then the composite, and making sure that I turn off the RGB only so that I use not just the RGB information, but all the information that's available in the layer. So basically bringing back all the visual information for the outside. What that does for me, it creates a series of layers of pixels that glow as they go towards the inside of my sphere, and they get darker as they go outside, and I get the volumetric values that I'm looking for on the orb. And so when I play this back, I'm getting volumetric clouds. Now you can keep on adding filters to this, layers to this, since these are, like I said, volumetric, and they are basically based on separate clouds. You can go ahead and make use. All of this is based on the information originally started with the cloud texture. So you can create a new series of these and then place them in between the outside clouds to create more layering. So for example, if we were to create a new composition, let's say, and I want to create a different texture on this, let's say, well, actually, it's basically the same thing. I'm not going to elongate it. It's basically the same. I was just going to create some kind of shape using the exact same techniques that I use for the clouds to create something that goes on the inside. And as long as I have transparency values on that, let's say an orb that has some kind of texture on it, like a cell texture, for example, or something like that, that you can see through, then it becomes part of the assembly, and it will sell the effect as if you had basically volumetric clouds in your composition.